How are you in whatever corner of the world I find you? So we're on to chapter 8. And I have this vision that there's probably one or two people at most really following this from the first chapter until the present. It's not that I'm getting desperate for feedback. I'm not. It's not really, this isn't a money-making enterprise. Part of me is going, oh, Mark, what have you gotten yourself into? Because I've started, so I'm going to finish. There is no point in me disappearing now and saying, oh, well, you know, who was I doing it for originally? Probably me, just to kind of wind down in the evenings. Ideas have legs, very tattered and worn copy we have here. There's lots I could say, but I'm not going to say anything. I was having one of those days where I'm in voiceover, and but I'm of a certain age now as well, where there's a lot less in front of me than there is behind me. So I'm getting to thinking about stuff that I really shouldn't be quite thinking about yet. And part of it is you go out and you look for this voiceover business as well. And when I was a young guy, I was a super sales guy. For many years, I was in sales, and I made things happen. I beat the bushes. I did everything I could to meet people. I was in IT, high-powered sales, senior executive level, and for big companies. I had a kind of go-getter, jet-setter kind of lifestyle for a bit. There was lots of commission coming in and stuff, and the money was just a byproduct of being really busy and really passionate. And I think I've lost my passion. For years, always, in tandem with that, was always a broadcasting thing with me, always. And I was always in and out of various radio stations on part-time basis or erstwhile basis, even TV at one point for a year. But I'm not even saying it's a midlife crisis, because I'm past the midlife. It's a motivation thing. And the more I say, the more I'm going to just walk myself into territory where you don't want to know, and that is fair enough. The comments are there if you're a fellow traveller in that regard. Chapter 8, Mr. Churchill sharpens his sword. I preempt by saying normally I skim over a chapter so that I hit the ground running. But I haven't read this today. I've been too busy. By the way, I did get a huge order. Just came in for voiceover. Big one. Good couple of $100. And I just didn't get excited by it. Anyway, so if I do fluff up on some lines, you're going to have to forgive me, because I have not read this chapter in 20 years. Far underground, below the granite pavements and wood-block roadways of Ludgate Circus, the River Fleet takes its secret journey to the Thames. Its waters are black as the ink of the street which takes its name. No fish are found today in the River Fleet, but plenty exercise their fins and flippers in the torrents and pools of Fleet Street. Most of them are sprats or sharks, though a few genuine whales stir the depths of the waters from time to time. One of the whales during my days in Fleet Street was Winston Churchill. For some time he worked as a colleague of mine on Lord Beaverbrook's Evening Standard. He did not take such pains over his articles as he has always taken over his speeches. For many years, Churchill wrote out every word of his parliamentary speeches in his own handwriting. Then he used to boom away at a looking-glass in the privacy of his bedroom, rehearsing them till he got each word perfect, including most of the impromptus which still adorn a Churchill oration. Now, you see, Churchill did his practice, unlike me. Sorry for that slurpy little break there. At this stage in his career, Churchill was down on his luck politically. His newspaper articles were, in a sense, potboilers. True, they were the best things of their kind appearing at the time, but not always of the supreme literary quality which is Churchill at his best. The Prime Minister-to-be used to read my political articles with care, though not always with appreciation. He helped me greatly with comments and suggestions which found their way to me. He took exception to the phrase, "for why," which I used from time to time. He would steam up to me in the lobby of the House of Commons, looking like a formidable battleship, pouting, "For why? For why?" at me aggressively through the funnel of his mouth. In those days, Churchill was a man possessed by one big idea. Hitler's big idea was, one race shall rule. Lenin's big idea was, one class shall rule. Churchill's big idea was, the Nazis shall not rule. They must be destroyed. This was not a popular idea in Britain, for those were the days when the British public's desire for peace outmatched their desire to beat down Hitler. Both the British public and Churchill knew that his big idea could only be achieved by war. Churchill had no substantial backing in his own party. He had the active distrust and hostility of the Labour Party and of the leftists. Many remembered his part in breaking the general strike and his editorship of the British Gazette. Some others recalled the days when our future true blue premier had spoken with candour, expansiveness and exuberance of our future red allies. So, Churchill sat all by himself in the moonlight, or almost, it seemed, in the sunset of a career which had somehow missed greatness. That's how I feel. Imagine me comparing myself, but I think that's just put in words how I'm kind of feeling. It's all kind of over and nothing happened, and I thought it was going to happen. Anyway, his war song against the Nazis was almost a solo. Just the same, he sang it fortissimo in the columns of the Evening Standard. Meanwhile, my boss, Lord Beaverbrook, the proprietor of that newspaper, was advocating the cause of splendid isolation. He was coining phrases such as, "There will be no war this year or next year either." He was paying me a large salary to write letters on the subject, and he was entirely opposed to Mr. Churchill's big idea. So Percy Cutlip, then editor of the Evening Standard, experienced something of the sensations of a football during a cup final. Fortunately, Percy has toughness, resilience, and a sense of humour, which are qualities needed by any successful football. His phone would ring in the morning. "Cutlip, this is Lord Beaverbrook here. What's the name of that fellow who writes in your paper?" "What's his name?" "Yes, Winston Churchill, that's the fellow I mean. Now, Percy, I hope you're not paying him too much for his articles." "Good God, all that? You don't mean it? That's terrible, terrible." "Well, anyway, I hope you're not tied up too long with him. How long does his contract run?" "Good God, a year." "Another whole year?" "Well now, see here, Percy, get him off the subject of the Nazis. He's obsessed by this damned fellow Hitler. Get him onto the broad home theme, the great themes of the empire, unemployment, agriculture. Let him write on subjects like that. Anything else? Goodbye to you." And Percy would find the telephone dead. And Percy would find the telephone dead in his hand. Then he would ring up Mr. Churchill. The conversation would run something like this. "Good morning, Mr. Cutlip. I thought we should deal this week with the subject of the Nazis. We must awaken the country to the danger of this gang of criminals, and I feel we would..." I do it, Churchill, will I? I'm going to stop interrupting now, because some of you guys are just so frickin' staid that if you had a national flag, it would be a piece of grey flannel. I digress. So I'm going to do my Churchill. I thought we should deal this week with the subject of the Nazis. We must awaken the country to the danger of this gang of criminals, and I feel we could profitably discuss the Nazi dreams of expansion in the Balkans this week. Yes, Mr. Churchill, that would be most interesting, but I wonder if perhaps this week an article on the broad home theme might give our readers a change, some subject like unemployment or agriculture. Quite so, Mr. Cutlip, quite so. And we will come on to the broad home theme, but I think this week a strong declaration on the Nazis will be more timely. And the telephone would again go silent. One evening I had to go to Churchill's country home on newspaper business. I travelled straight from my work in Fleet Street to Chartwell. It was summer weather. I was wearing old clothes and was hot and tired from the bustle and stir of the presses. Churchill was in his garden. He was dressed up in some ancient and subfuse costume, which made him look like a genial Michelin tire advertisement come to life. He was building a wall and handling the bricks with an enthusiasm which I could easily detect, and with a skill which I found it harder to judge, though the wall seemed straight enough. He had a party of distinguished guests coming to dinner. He insisted on my staying. A black crow among gilded birds of paradise, an inky journalist in grey bags among white ties and tiaras. Yet I was made to feel the most welcome of all the guests. Churchill has a great heartedness, a warmth, and a simplicity in private life which explains the rock-ribbed loyalty of his friends. He fetched his own shaving tackle for me and stood over me in his private bathroom while I washed, brushed, scraped, and made myself presentable. He showed all the comradeship and solicitude of an elder brother, eager for my sake, not his own, that I should appear to the best advantage among his friends. It was a revealing sidelight on the character of this citizen of fate. At that period Churchill was almost at the ebb of his fortunes. He was mellow, genial, philosophical, and wise. Lord Beaverbrook, in writing of Churchill, has recorded his opinion that Churchill down is the most charming of companions. But Churchill, on the top of the wave, has in him the stuff of which tyrants are made. I remember that Lord Baldwin was on the point of retiring from the premiership. Churchill had many reasons for being bitter with Lord Baldwin. He had been in the British cabinet before Lord Baldwin entered Parliament at all. He had seen the older, slower, steadier man start from far behind, catch him up and outstrip him in the race for power. Yet Churchill was not bitter. He said to me after dinner that night, "Baldwin is as clever as a redskin. He will go down to Bewdley, and on Friday nights, for whoever, or whenever it is that he dances, he will prance around his wigwam pole with his bleeding scalp dangling at his belt." He laughed without rancour. It was said with lightness and in tones which Lord Baldwin himself would have heard without taking offence. Later Churchill spoke of the things deep in his heart. He spoke with the smouldering fire of a visionary about the need to destroy the Nazis. He felt war was inevitable, and that the sooner it was over, the sooner to sleep. This big idea had gripped him entirely, just as Hitler and Lenin had been gripped by their ideas. It stirred me to meet the explosive force of a master passion in an age when most Britons regarded enthusiasm with suspicion. As a result of that evening in his home, one thing became perfectly clear to me. I had doubts as to whether this simple and single idea, the Nazis must be destroyed, was adequate by itself to build a new world, but I had no doubt at all that as an organizer of victory against the Nazis, Churchill would be unsurpassed. I did not want war. I did not yet quit my hopes of peace. But if war had to be our lot and portion, I wanted Churchill. I can see him now, a sombre and brooding figure, bidding me farewell from his doorway in the darkness of that summer night. Looked upon by the majority of his countrymen as a spent force. He was heavy with his own sense of impending destiny. From that time, I worked hard to support Churchill, in public with my pen when I was allowed to do so, and in private with my tongue, whether I was allowed to do so or not. Even after the outbreak of war, when Chamberlain was Premier and some still hoped for an accommodation with the Nazis, I got into disgrace in certain quarters for asserting that Churchill must become Premier at the earliest possible moment. A book called Guilty Men was published. Over 200,000 copies of it were sold. It flayed some of the public men who had frittered away the time in the years which the locusts had eaten, while the Nazi power grew. Many people said this book played its part in assisting Churchill's rise to the pinnacle of the popularity and public esteem. Some alleged that I had something to do with the writing of it. Anyhow, guilty or innocent as I may be, Churchill grew in power. He rode to destiny. His big idea bears this resemblance to the big ideas of Hitler and Lenin. Everything which stands in its way has to be destroyed. That is part of the price of a war like this. Churchill is the one man in my lifetime who has been able to mobilize the British people to a passion comparable with the passion of other nations for their ideologies. The Nazis must be destroyed. True enough, but after their destruction, what happens to the big idea? It is great, but is it adequate to our age? Rome had the slogan, "Carthage must be destroyed." Carthage was destroyed. Presently Rome fell too. She had not the sustained initiative of a selfless patriotism to hold her country together after the external danger was removed. Chapter 8 was short and sweet. So we're actually up to Chapter 9 for tomorrow, which is entitled Something Hit Me. You'll probably hit me for being an old moany Irishman tonight. I'm sorry if I gave you too much insight into my mental condition. They are very much first world problems. Good night.